Good day to you all. Welcome to Maths Global Learning Hub with Mr. T. In today's lesson, we're going to draw the graph of f of x is equal to cos x. And we are going to use the table of values. So let's begin by completing this table of values by substituting into our calculators. The first one here, I'm going to get 1. Then here I'm going to get 0. Then this one I'm going to get -1. Then I get 0. Then I'm going to get 1. Now let's plot the points. I'm starting here at 0, 1, at 90, it's 0, at 180, it's -1, at 270, it's 0, and at 360, it's 1. We join these points as usual using freehand. Away we go. And we have our graph. This is our y-axis. This is our x-axis. If I look at this graph here, I'm going to see that this point here is giving me the minimum turning point. And then this point here is the maximum, and also this point here as well is the maximum. If I look at this graph here, I can establish the period being equal to 360 degrees. In other words, this graph is completing a full cycle after 360 degrees. You can also see that the range of this graph is from -1 up to +1. I can also calculate the amplitude of this graph using the formula maximum value of y minus the minimum value of y divided by 2. And if I substitute, this is what I get as my amplitude. And my amplitude is equal to 1. Let's move on to the next section here, where we want to answer these questions using the graphs that we have drawn. For which values of x is f of x greater than 0? So if I look at my graph here, I need that section of the graph where it is greater than 0, and I can see that I've got two sections here. I've got this part here from 0 to 90, and I also have this part here from 270 degrees to 360 degrees. So I can write my answers as and I have used the interval notation. Where is the graph less than 0? If I go to my graph, I can check here. Below the x-axis is from 90 to 270, and I can write my answer as starting with 90. Please be very careful here, and then up to 270 degrees. And then when I go to the next part here, it says, where is this graph increasing? So I have to go to my graph and check the section on the graph where it is increasing. From 180, I can mark, up to 360 degrees. Remember, we're looking for the x values. So I can write my answer as x from 180 degrees to 360 degrees. And please always check on your graph or mark that section on your graph where the graph is increasing before you commit yourself to writing down the answer. Then the last part here, it wants us to identify where the graph is decreasing. So when I go to my graph, I'll see that the graph is decreasing in this section. I can mark here, and it's from 0 to 180 degrees. And now I can write my answer. And if you notice, these answers, I've written them all using the interval notation. You can also use the inequality notation.